everybody, and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson. And I'm really excited to welcome to the show True Black, joining us all the way from Taiwan. So, hello, True.
Hello, Victoria.
Great to have you on the show. Now, I found out about True via a connection on LinkedIn. One of the previous guests on the show, I think it was Stephen Parker, who introduced us originally. And I was really curious about the executive coaching and team coaching that you do, because you are working with leaders really sort of everywhere around the globe. And to start off with, I was really kind of interested to hear about what are the sort of typical issues that you see leaders coming up against at the moment?
At the moment, okay. At the moment, some of the sort of macro trends are dealing with very complex types of challenges. Yeah, things happen in one part of the globe that have reverberations that you might not have predicted at any level of the company. You know that you're going to be affected, but you're not sure how you're going to be affected. So being able to do what you can to anticipate what might be coming, and sort of be able to be in the trenches and be very operational and very focused on what you're doing day to day, but also being able to get up on the balcony or the top of the mountain and have a scan of what's going on is very critical. And then it's become more important than ever to be able to marshal a team around the effort of navigating opportunities, yes, but also challenges that come. Just being very inclusive about that is pretty critical. It's more critical, I think, than it's ever been.
And that is challenging, right? There's a lot going on and there's a lot of change happening, and the changes seems to me becoming more rapid. And yet there is that kind of real balance that goes on around keeping the strategic view, leading the way, and then sometimes being quite operational and supporting the team in that way. So, how do you encourage the leaders you work with to really think about this?
Okay, well, the concept is that we have to be able to zoom in and zoom out uh, many times a day, really. But also you can look at it from a little bit of more of a longer term perspective. So let's say in a given month, I recommend that leaders take time to think about where they're going to find time in a given month or even a given week to get the team together and talk about what's going on more of a macro or a broad scale level. So what's going on with the around the globe, how that might be impacting us, what's going on in the industry, what's going on in our organization, what's going on between the different businesses or divisions or functions in the organization, and how are we navigating that? How are we prepared to deliver value given what's going on right now? So the tendency is, yeah, it's to be very focused on the day-to-day operational stuff, and you just have to carve out time for you as a leader to think, to reflect, to talk to people that you trust who are very intelligent and caring and willing to offer some advice to you, but also getting your team together to talk about that.
Yeah. And I think that's really, it sounds so simple, but actually it's not easy, right? Because I know talking to some of the clients I'm working with right now, even creating that time for the conversations is challenging. And yet, on the flip side, we know that personal contact time is so important. In fact, those relationships, that human to human conversation is more important than ever, right?
Absolutely. And there's just so much overwhelm. And so it's easy to sort of dig in and be sort of narrowly focused on what you're most concerned about and neglect the importance of collaboration,
Mm.
across functions, but also just within the team or the teams that you lead.
Absolutely. So what do you see as some of the key skills that leaders really need for now, but also really thinking about the future? So being future proof and making sure that they are being the best leader that they can be.
Okay. Well, we can list a bunch of things. We've already mentioned some of them. Nowadays it's important to be not just strategic, but strategically agile. So, the strategic planning of old is really not relevant anymore in today's environment. So you have to be able to move very, very quickly to know where to move to. You've got to be willing to move to the wrong place sometimes and then shift back, pivot back. Um, Remind me of the question again.
Yeah, no, I was just kind of curious about, like you talked about some of the strategically agile. I love that. That's really interesting. But also just like what other skills are going to be really important for now and for the future? Perhaps skills that are more important than ever that, have come up that you notice that are really important in the training that you're doing.
Okay. So, in terms of dealing with complexity, I would call that the ability to continually evolve the way that you think about problems. So, problem solving capability, judgment, critical thinking is more important than ever, just because of the complexity that people are dealing with. So that's one key area. And again, I always say, I'm like a broken record, but involve the team in that, because if you've only got a couple of people who are really able to solve complex problems, you're going to disempower those who aren't. You sort of have to make
Mm.
the effort to bring everybody in. So developing people, developing talent is a critical related skill to this effort of dealing with complex issues and complex problems. I would say that it's an oldie, but it's still a goodie and still very, very critical, which is just that ability to collaborate with cross-functional colleagues, other teams. Organizations are so integrated now, and you have to be able to manage the interpersonal aspects of that, and also work together to come up with the right way forward. That's really, very critical. And then I have one more, but I'll pause for a second and let you say anything you want to.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, yes, before we come to the final one, I mean, the collaboration point for me is really critical. And I think when I think about the teams that I work with, the individuals I work with, that collaboration can be quite challenging, particularly when you're working across different time zones, different functions, often not meeting kind of in person. So, what are your sort of ideas and tips for people who are really struggling with that collaboration or meeting resistance to that collaboration?
It'll be something that everybody has thought of before, and that is don't neglect the relationship aspect of collaboration. So we all, you succeed in an organization because you're good at solving problems. You're result oriented, right? You're focused on hitting targets or achieve or
Mm.
surpassing. And so it's very easy to take getting support from other people, or being able to work with other people effectively. It's very easy to take that for granted. It's a given that when the time comes, we're in sales, and when the time comes to work with our marketing colleagues around, what we're going to be doing next year to generate more interest in what we're doing, that support's going to be there. But if you haven't done much to keep in touch with how they're doing, what they're focused on, how they're pivoting or evolving, or just keeping up with the relationships, you're going to be what you hope will happen will not happen, or it won't
Mm.
happen easily.
Yeah, so it's
So
like investing in the relationship, right? So is what I'm hearing you say.
yeah, yeah, having the lunches, checking how's it
Mm.
going. We haven't talked in a few months. How are things going? What's up on your end of the business? Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, excellent. I love that. I really love that. And you mentioned you had one other idea. I don't know if you still have that to mind that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I haven't forgotten it. It's kind of counterintuitive. We say, what capabilities do leaders need to develop or take to the next level to
Mm.
meet the challenges of the modern era? It's something that in coaching, I find that most leaders are are not doing enough of. And it's working on themselves.
Mm.
Another way to put it is inner work. Sometimes
Mm.
we might say it's resilience, but it's really just having a program in place that you stick to that allows you to optimize your own well-being, your energy, your
Mm.
mental energy, your physical energy, your emotional energy, all of those things. And I find that leaders with good intentions will sometimes be so focused on all of the externals that they ignore the importance of that internal stuff that
Mm.
keeps them keeps them at peak or close to peak levels of effectiveness as often as they can be there.
I love this idea. And actually, this is really interesting because it's come up a couple of times recently in conversations on the podcast. And I love, but the way you're framing it is slightly different. So you're thinking about the inner work that needs to be done to make a leader resilient, but also this idea of being able to perform at their peak. That is a fascinating idea for me because I think about athletes and how they invest in themselves to get to peak performance. And there's a parallel, right, for leaders, I can imagine.
Absolutely. World-class athletes all have a very robust inner game that
Mm,
they cultivate, that they protect, that they work on, they invest in. If you watch carefully as a spectator, or if the cameras happen to show, you'll see that before, for example, a sprint race or a longer running race, the world class athletes they're talking to themselves. They're going through routine to sort of
mm,
prime themselves internally so that they
mm.
can then explode in the way that they need to in that race externally. And in leadership, it's very easy to overlook the importance of doing that.
Okay. So what does that look like practically then? So when we say inner work, is this about affirmations, kind of confidence building, or are there certain tools that you like to recommend?
Okay, so I look at this as there's a long game and there's a short game.
Hmm.
The long game is what you are doing on a daily basis or on a regular basis to to be happy, to be joyful. If you want a methodology, I often will rely on Martin Seligman's positive psychology,
Hmm.
and he has the PERMA model and the pillars of maintaining well-being and a sense of joy de vie,
Hmm.
joy in just living. And one of those is having meaningful connections with people who you care about, who care about you. And it's very easy to, a lot of executives, you say, how often do you meet with your closest friends or your mentors? And they'll say, well, haven't done that for a while.
Mm.
And they're not getting the nourishment that comes from supporting close friends and being supported by those
Mm.
close friends that really keep them at their best. So
Mm.
that's the long, the long game is things like that. It's obviously physical, having some sort of regimen to stay energetic and healthy.
Mm.
There's a lot of, I don't recommend it all the time, but for some leaders, I will introduce mindfulness practices to them.
Hmm.
And I always have to say, it's not sitting there doing, Tibetan Buddhist meditations all day. That could be, you could do, that or Hindu meditations, those sorts of things. Those are Vipassana, I should say. Those are great, but it's also just about, finishing a meeting and not having another meeting immediately planned right after that meeting and then going outside and taking a 15-minute walk in some green space,
Mm.
and with no headphones and just listening to the birds sing, and just refreshing your soul basically so that you can then come back and be ready for the next challenge.
I love this. And this is absolutely in line with how I think about the world as well. And at the same time, I can imagine there might be a few people watching or listening and going, well, yes, in theory, this all sounds great and I get it logically. But what is the actual impact of this? So I don't know if you've got any examples of how you've used it yourself with your own clients, with your own people you've been working with, and the sort of kind of impact it has on people.
Sure. Well, maybe it's useful to not think about it as, what's it going to get me, but to think about it as absolutely necessary maintenance work that if you don't do, will result in you crashing and burning.
Okay, got it. So it's more like you need to keep your like car ticking out. You need to get that service regularly. Otherwise, your car's gonna break down basically at some point. Okay, got it. So
Yes.
it's actually that way around. Okay, interesting. Mm,
Or experience a gradual loss of energy and all the problem solving capability, judgment, emotional intelligence. You'll have lots of leaks in the vessel, and you may not
mm,
even realize it. And it's because you're not doing those things to care for yourself. So you wanted an example from coaching. Lots of different stories I could share. So I coached a fellow a couple of years ago who is a very capable, really charismatic, intelligent leader, but who, because of some personal challenges with his family, is a terminally ill father and some other
mm.
things that happened in his personal life, and also just work stress that he wasn't really processing well. He got into this pattern where he would lose his temper with colleagues. He would lose his temper. His subordinates were scared of him. They didn't know what sort of mood he would be in from day to day. And he didn't want things to be that way, but he didn't know how to pull himself out of it. And he was lucky that he had a boss and then a senior HR function head who saw that he needed some help. So I was able to work with him on, and that was, he was very bold and brave and humble, really, about facing up to his issues. We had some 360 data, and it was pretty painful to
Mm,
see how people felt about working with him.
mm.
And so, long story short, he ended up getting really interested in mindfulness meditation, and he found some guided meditation teachers that he really enjoyed. And then we did some work with cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
Okay.
Yeah, to sort of rewire his response mechanism to triggering things that happen. So one of the things that would trigger him is when people were not seeing what he was talking about. They weren't understanding what he was talking about. And he would sort of say, "Are you stupid?" This kind of thing. "Are you dense? I thought you were an intelligent." He would be insulting. And so with CBT, what we want to do is we want to say, okay, what triggers you? And then how are you responding currently? And then helping the person realize that they are not bound to that particular response, that ineffective response, that damaging response. And then we get into a discussion of how we want to respond. And then we end that with how we're going to remember to respond the way we want to respond in the moment. So I often recommend to clients who are doing this kind of response rewiring type of work that they come up with a physical reminder, like a talisman or a symbol that reminds them of how they want to show up. And he ended up purchasing a ring. Yeah, he bought a very
Mm.
nice ring. He wore it every day, and he had something carved on the inside. He never told me what it was. It was just private, and that was fine. But whenever he felt that temper rising, he would turn the ring, and,
Ah, okay.
and that would
That is
remind.
fascinating. Wow, that's really fascinating because that's a very subtle thing. Like nobody else had to know what that meant to him, but it was a very clear physical symbol to him about how to change in the moment. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, and so he would meditate. His long game. I mentioned long game, short game. His long game was to meditate basically every day.
Hmm.
Um, and then to have some time to sort of think through how he wanted to show up during the day. That was
Hmm.
part of the to a morning meditation, and sort of stop and then think about, okay, and what do I want to bring? Which version of me do I want to bring? Sort of calibrating, getting ready. Put the ring on, and then the ring was the sort of short game. In the moment, if he was
Mm.
triggered, that he would go to, and then he ended up adding a meditation in the evening before bed so that he could sleep well and be rested. And yeah, he ended up changing the way he interacted with people. I went in for a follow up about 3 months. We worked together for about a year, and then I went in for a follow up later, and we do stakeholder interviews, see what everybody's saying. They said well, he hasn't lost his temper in 9 months.
Wow.
He's him. He's a nice guy.
So this
And
really works. And I think this is fascinating as well because you said something very something that really kind of piqued my attention, which was actually sometimes people get very wedded to the idea that this is just the way I am. This is just, it's really hard for me to change. Like I can't imagine responding in another way. But I think what you're saying with that methodology is you really get to choose how you want to respond.
yeah, yeah, yeah. He made a conscious choice to do that, and his motivation was fascinating. He initially said, "I got to be honest. I know, True. I know you're kind of a humanist because you told me you are. Um, I'm not. I'm interested in getting work done, but." And I realized that if I was interested, if I was more interested in caring for the feelings and well-being of other people, that would be a good thing. I'm just not there yet, which I thought was great. It was very honest. So what he ended up doing is he said, but I realized that what I want to get done can't get done if people are unhappy to see me. So
Mm.
I'm going to go with that motivation. And then at the very end, he shared with me. I know it's a long story, but at the very end, he shared with me something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. He said, I started out with the intention of not of making things better for other people, but just being, more effective in my work as a leader. He said, but ultimately, almost against my will, I became more caring. And he said that he had a neighbor. He's got a neighbor who has two young boys, and he said, "I've never really liked children, and I found myself over these months of doing this work. I found myself gradually enjoying seeing those kids to the point where I actually will go over and play with them a couple of times a week."
Mm.
So
Wow. So the impact of it wasn't just about work, but it was about the broader impact to him in his life and how he was rethinking things.
it really helped him experience a kind of personal
Mm.
revolution, or really
Wow.
in his life. Yes.
I love that. That's a brilliant story. And thank you for sharing that. And also the sort of process that you went through with him, because I think there is that sense that people sometimes feel like this is just me. This is difficult for me to change. So is it work, this inner work, is this something you can do by yourself? Or do you always need somebody like a guide or a coach to help you through that?
Okay. Well, a lot of it needs to be done alone, but then it depends kind of on your personality. We have people who are maybe a little more towards the introverted side of the introvert extrovert scale.
Mhm.
And then, you hear people say, I'm an extrovert, I'm an introvert. And I say, well, where are you on the scale? It's not so extreme, but for people who are more introverted, the definition of, extroverted, the definition of being an extrovert is that you gain energy and joy by interaction. So if you're more of an extroverted person, you want to have more time in dialogue and conversation with
Mm.
people who inspire you and who you care about and who care about you. And then if you're more of an introvert, you might want to have a bit more of a quieter inner game, and that will be more energizing for you.
Yeah, they're very wise words. So thank you for sharing that. And I also wanted to go back to something you touched on very briefly earlier. You talked about positive psychology, which I'm sure people can understand the concept of, but you talked about the PERMA model. That's right. And I kind of was quite curious about what that is, and so that you can share that also with the people here.
Okay. The PERMA model. Uh, the P is positive emotions. So it's about, and this is part of inner work. It's taking time to experience joy and to do the things that allow you to experience joy. So for me, I will on Tuesday nights, I go and I have a boxing session. I'm a gentle, humanistic person, but I love to hit the heavy bag.
Love it.
So that just makes me happy. I go in and I might be tired and I leave and I'm just feeling physically great and it's wonderful stress release and then I've learned a couple of new moves with my trainer. My daughter Savannah is a hip hop dancer. She's semi-professional. She's 18 and she's making a
Wow.
little of that. And so for we call her Savvy. For Savvy, positive emotion comes from many times from either being with friends, of course, but also getting, doing something challenging around dance or just getting up on stage. So that's the
Mm.
and then engagement is engagement with the E is engagement. And that's just engaging in activities that bring you that you feel are meaningful, that also bring you joy. So if you like community service, uh, you would want to go and engage with people in a community service type of situation. It's some people have hobbies. They like to build things, tinker with things. They like to just do things that they find very, very meaningful, or writing, things like that.
Mm.
The R in the PERMA model is relationships, which I've already kind of mentioned. I say it's got to be with people who you care about, who care about you, and preferably, they're very loving and smart folks. Um, and then meaning is just looking at. We went back to engagement, and I mentioned meaning. Engagement is more about actively getting involved with stuff that you find meaningful. Meaning overall could be, having, for example, I like to read philosophy, and I find it very applicable to the work that I do. So I find great joy in reading a lot of things, including philosophy or fiction, stuff like that, just doing things that you feel are meaningful. That's the M. And then A is achievement. So we all tend to thrive more if we feel a sense of progress, forward movement.
Mm.
That's why the productivity experts will say, don't come in the morning and answer all your emails. Come in the morning and make something. Move a project forward,
Yeah.
and answer your emails.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I have to say, yeah, no, for me, like mornings are my creativity time when I'm writing, when I'm making things, recording podcasts, having good conversations. Definitely the emails and the admin come later in the day. That's a really great explanation. Thank you so much, Drew. It's really helpful to understand what that looks like. And that feels like it's very in line with everything we've been talking about here about resilience, inner work, really cultivating your relationships with yourself, actually inner work, but also with others as well. So I think there's been some real richness here today. I'm really curious, what's coming up for you next personally in your work? I know you kind of work with teams, you work with individuals, but what's coming up for you in the next few months?
Okay, so yeah, my practice has kind of evolved. I started as a sort of journeyman, journey person, corporate trainer, and because I'm fluent in Mandarin Chinese, so that
Amazing.
to go all over the Chinese speaking world basically.
Mhm.
Mainly Hong Kong, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, the greater China region. But let's see, I've gradually gotten more and more into working globally. So I've got some interesting global projects coming up. I have my first project in Dubai. I'm coaching a senior leader and working with a
Mhm.
lot of different stakeholders, and that's pretty exciting. Let's see, yeah, lots of coaching. And then I'm delighted that I just had a team coaching project that wrapped up. It was all done, and I like to always have at least a few, two or three team coaching projects. These are more long-term engagements where I'm working with usually a management team, a leadership team over 6 months or 9 months, and I'm asked to get involved because there's some dysfunction going on either interpersonally, it's usually interpersonal, and also in terms of how they're working together on decision making, and and taking the business forward. So I just got confirmed a couple of new team coaching projects that I'm really excited to get started on.
Yeah, and that's really powerful work, right? When you can help a whole team work better together, particularly if there are sort of issues which are present, and help them, give them that space and time to work through them, then that must be incredibly well, it must give a good sense of achievement when you can get the results and actually see the team performing better together.
If I'm working with a group of leaders who are experiencing this kind of interpersonal strife and dysfunction, um, it's about they're in pain. Okay, they're suffering. So I see this as, I don't think I'm a savior or anything. In fact, very often I feel challenged as to how I'm going to help these people. you know, Sometimes I regularly reach out for ideas and feedback from friends in the field. I get supervision from time to time, just to be at my best. But it's really about helping them. Everybody who's in that situation wants things to be better, but they're stuck and they don't know how to make it better. And having it be a collective problem complicates it. So you have two or three people say, "I'm tired of how inefficient our meetings are and all of these unresolved conflicts among us. I'm sick of it, and let's do something about it." But then they don't really have the authority to drive that process. And sometimes, often there's a GM or a country head, and they know that there's a problem, but they're not sure exactly how to resolve that. So, what my opportunity is to go in and say, "Shall we fix things?" And they always say yes, and then we'll do a lot of things around talking about how they want to be together, both in the sessions and outside of the sessions. Sometimes I will say, now we all have the angel on this shoulder and the devil on this one. Not to be religious, but it's just a metaphor people are familiar with.
Mm.
And can we commit as a group that we're gonna focus on that angel? We're gonna try to bring that angel to these situations.
Mm.
And then one of the things I find is that interpersonal issues do need to be addressed, but you don't do it by getting them to sit in a room and talk about why they don't like each other. That doesn't work. That's very counterproductive.
I can imagine, yes. So how does it work? How do you get the moving through those issues?
I should say, I have great respect for psychologists, and as a coach, you have to be careful that you don't try to play psychologist, right? So maybe there are psychologists who have ways of doing that, but I don't find it helpful. I take a lesson from appreciative inquiry methodology, and that begins with, what's good, what's going on here that's good, and then I combine it with a future focus. It sort of echoes Uncle Marshall Goldsmith. Feedback forward is the technique that he recommends. It's kind of along those lines. And so I get them focused. I try to get them out of the person to person strife kind of thinking, or the focus on the self, and I get them focused on what they want to do together, sort of getting out of themselves and focused on what they want to, envisioning, you could call it. And they all go for it. So far, so good. And I in terms of the interpersonal, addressing interpersonal stuff, things that work for that are to get them to understand each other in ways that they have never understood each other before. And so I have some exercises that I do that are very non-threatening, and they don't dig up trauma, and they're not weird or uncomfortable. It's just some very nice conversations they have to allow them to realize that the person that they don't like kind of has a good side too.
Mm. Yeah.
Recognize that part of them, and to connect around things that they have in common, instead of remaining so divided around things that they disagree on. Yeah. So I do that, and then we work on the processes. And process can actually really help with the interpersonal strife.
Very interesting. I was going to just jump in because I think you said something really interesting, which was just having a conversation actually can really, really help. That idea of you're not suddenly saying, often we create almost this image of the other person and we hold them at a distance. So we kind of reinforce that image, but actually just talking to them, having the conversation can sort of free up their perceptions and free up the assumptions that others are having. So I love that. I think that's very, very powerful. And so, yes, I really love that idea as well. It's not just about interpersonal kind of working on those dynamics. It isn't just about the relationships, but it's also processes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I do start with interpersonal stuff, and again, contracting around how we want to be together, and sort of what we want to see when we're together, or when we're collaborating, what we don't want to see. Sort of
Mhm.
those sort of get that out there. I make everything visual, lots of artifacts, posters, things like that that they can see and be reminded of, and I facilitate them to create that
Mhm.
together. It's a group effort. Yeah, and then I sort of check in with them and say, okay, are we ready to rebuild um, some processes that are causing some issues for you in the business, in the way that you work together? And yeah, let's work on those processes. And for this, I will. I mean, there's a lot of I can give you a list of common problems with
Mm.
how to collaborate. But
Well,
I did.
maybe there you can give us an example of like one or two of the kind of the process problems that you see.
Oh, sure. Okay, so let's do a top two,
Mm-hmm.
most common. So um, one of them is the way that they make decisions together. And that could be anything from, it's usually a litany of problems. So they come to meetings, they come to discussions not knowing, not being really clear about what needs to be decided.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Purpose, the agenda is not clear. And then sometimes I even wonder why they are there. There's also issues around making sure people know what's going to be discussed so that they can prepare the necessary data
Mm-hmm.
to inform the decisions that they're making. And then what very often happens is the intention around decision making uh, basically blocks them from making a good decision that everyone can buy into. The underlying assumptions about how we decide, the rules of the game, uh, basically stop them from being efficient in their decision making.
Mm. I love that. And I think that's something so simple, but actually really powerful that there is a blocker that hasn't been acknowledged. So you said decision making, and was there another one that you think is also a big process that gets perhaps not right at the moment?
Yeah, and you can actually link these together. The second one I would say is just um, conflict resolution, the
Mm.
approach they use to resolve conflicts between them.
Mm.
And it's kind of symbiotic. So because of this broken decision making process, people, it causes conflict, unnecessary conflict. And then
Yeah.
because they don't have a way of working through conflict in a healthy way, their decisions, are not. They don't make decisions efficiently. They can't
Hmm.
come to a decision. The
Hmm.
politics get in. The politics sort of pollute the process. Personal interest gets in the way, and those sorts of things because they're upset about these unresolved conflicts.
Mm. Fantastic. So the decision making process, the conflict resolution not being in place. That's brilliant, Drew. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. I'm really conscious of time and making sure that that we kind of wrap up at this point, probably because we're sort of had an amazing time to have this conversation, and you've shared so generously your insights here today. I'm just kind of, I wanted to invite you, if people want to find out more about your team coaching approach, individual coaching, the sort of develop executive coaching that you do and development training that you do, what is the best way for people sort of to find out more about you?
Oh, sure. Thanks for asking. So, a few ways to do that. LinkedIn, I do check fairly regularly. Not a power user, but I'm on there frequently enough that they can certainly reach out. And I guess we'll share my LinkedIn profile with people. If they want, I do some writing around leadership for our subscriber list. We have about 2,000 people who read.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and it's not as regular as I'd like it to be. It's so you won't be getting bombarded, but hopefully you'll get a thoughtful, inspiring uh, piece of writing with some useful resources if you join the mailing list. So they can certainly, I'll provide a link for them to join the mailing list, and we do that in English and in Chinese. With some,
Fantastic.
I have a designer that sort of makes it look nice. It's short. I try to keep it to about 800 words. And then there's a related YouTube channel so I'll share, for example, tips for managers who want to use coaching methodologies in their work. And then there'll be a video that sort of shares an anecdote around how that works.
Mm.
So there's that, and then I also write a Substack blog for people who are in facilitation and training. It's called Training Zen,
Oh,
and
wow.
I do that only.
Fantastic. Great. Well, listen, that sounds fantastic, and we will certainly share all those links in the show notes so people can kind of go follow. But that is just amazing. I'm saying wow because there is so much that you're doing there in terms of videos and blogs and sharing kind of with the world really what you're doing, and the fact you can do it also in Chinese as well as in English is amazing as well.
Thank you, thank you. Well, part of my inner work is to express myself in writing. It brings me joy. So
Mm.
if I'm able to help somebody with it, it makes me even happier.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, particularly as I know it's later in your sort of early evening now in Taiwan. But thank you so much for being here today, for sharing your insights with the listeners, the people watching this. And yeah, look forward to catching up with you very soon, True.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and to anyone who listened all the way to the end. Bravo. And, please, if I can help you with anything, if you'd like a thinking partner, you need some help with something, just feel free to reach out. Happy to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, True, and look forward to seeing everyone next time on Cultural Communication Confidence.